Hi everybody, Jim Sammons here. One of my favorite fish to catch along the California and Baja coastline and out at the islands is calico bass. Quite honestly, I'm pretty sure a calico bass was the very first fish I ever caught off my kayak. And I've been addicted to these fish ever since. They're kind of the saltwater guys' version of the smallmouth bass. These things bulldog you. They run down into structure. They just dive down and they pull hard. And if you don't keep good pressure on them, you're gonna lose them. So I'm gonna kind of give you an idea of how I target calico bass and the gear I use when I'm going after them. For the most part, if I'm going for calico bass, I'm looking for turbulent water, off points, boiler rocks. If you don't know what a boiler rock is, basically that's a rock that's down below the surface, and when the wave action goes over it, water gets pushed up and it looks like the water's boiling. So that's why we call them boiler rocks. It's also kind of the danger zone in kayak fishing, so if you're gonna fish those areas, you gotta beware. The other places you look for them is out in the kelp forest. When the water's a little bit warmer, they'll be a little bit higher in the water column, so they'll be just underneath those kelp strands. So you'll see these big mats of kelp, and you can throw right over the top of it, and sometimes these fish will blow up right through it. You work these kelp stringers, and the fish will be hiding underneath this string here, and then they'll come out. So you work right along the kelp stringers. It works better if you work with the grain of the kelp. So what I mean by that is, if this is the bottom of the kelp and the kelp is up top here, it has all these fronds going this way. So you want to go with the grain this way, because if you work it against the grain, you're much more likely to snag in that kelp. So try to work against or with the grain, as we say, or with the current. You'll have much better luck and you'll snag a lot less, particularly in those kelp forests. Although there is one saying with kayak fishing, and I should say, there is a saying that we always go with calico bass fishing, particularly in the boiler rocks and on the inshore stuff. If you're not catching the structure, you're probably not close enough to it. So don't be afraid to really get your lures down there in the structure, because if they're in the boiler rocks, those things are down underneath a rock and they're gonna come up and hit it. So you gotta get that thing down in here so they can see it, because the water's so turbulent and dirty. They come up and just bam, bam. You know, they only have a split second to hit it. So make sure you get that thing down there so they have the longest amount of time to see it. For the most part, I'm a bait caster guy, a low profile bait caster. Now you want a reel that's gonna pick up a lot of line really quickly, because sometimes you're ripping these lures across the surface. I can always slow down if I need a slower presentation. But sometimes it's really fast. The other thing is, in a kayak particularly, because when you're pulling on a fish, the kayak wants to move towards that fish, it's hard to keep a lot of pressure on the fish sometimes. So make sure that you have a reel that's gonna pick up line quickly so you can keep that constant pressure on the fish and keep him from diving back down into the rocks or underneath the kelp. I want to have a rod that's gonna give me good casting distance so I can get it way up into the boiler rocks without having to put my kayak way up into the boiler rocks. So I usually go with a 7.5 to 8.5 foot rod, and that rod is heavy action, medium heavy action, and fast taper. Now what that means, and you know, sometimes people don't even understand that, but fast taper is basically, where does that rod bend? So is it bending up here or is it bending down here? So with a really fast taper rod, it reacts to the fish very quickly, and I can really keep a lot of pressure on it. Heavy action is basically how stiff is that rod overall. So this is a medium heavy, extra fast action. So meaning it's bending way up here at the tip, and it's a nice, good rod that I can keep constant pressure on the fish, okay? If you're ever curious as to what a rod is, if you're not really sure, most of the rods have it written down the side. What their action is, what the power rating is, what line you should use, and what lure weight you should use. So look on the side of most rods, good rods, and it'll be right there written out for you. So on my reel, depending on the water clarity, I'm generally gonna have 50-pound Seaguar Kanzen braid. And I can go either straight tied to the lure, Or if it's good, very clear water, I'm going to add a 30-pound Seaguar fluorocarbon leader. So clear water, fluorocarbon, dirty water, not as important. You can go straight tide braid. So that's my setup when I'm going to be either throwing a nice soft plastic like the Sebile Magic Swimmer. The beauty of these, throw it into the heavy kelp, throw it into the rocks, it fishes weedless. Okay, so this thing fishes almost 100% weedless. You very rarely snag on it. Another option is a soft plastic like this. If you're going to be fishing a little bit deeper, want to get a little bit deeper into the structure, you can get a little bit more weight on these lead heads and a paddle tail. And this is an old throwback. This is what we've been using for years, but they're very, very effective. And one of my favorite colors for calico bass is brown. If you can get one brown with an orange belly, even better. Another way to fish for calico bass, if you have a little bit more open water, so if you're fishing in, say, eelgrass beds on the inside, that's very clear. If you're fishing a little bit more open columns in the kelp, so you're not real thick kelp beds, is to throw a surface iron. Now this looks like a big lure, just like the one I have here. I mean, it looks like a big lure, but it's actually quite light. So it just swims maybe this far below the surface. So you can fish it in that shallow water. Don't let it sink too much because it'll snag on you. But these things have a nice, slow kick to them. You can wind them fast and they'll kick fast, but they're usually best on a nice medium wind, and they have this nice kind of kick as they're coming back to you. And when they're on the surface iron, man, that is some good fun. And a yellowtail or a white sea bass will hit that as well. So when I'm throwing those, I'm usually, again, with a 8.5 foot rod. You really want to be able to get good casting distance. Again, this is going to be a heavy action, fast taper rod, something I can keep constant pressure on that fish, something I can really wind on that fish and grind him back to the boat. Again, these aren't huge fish. I think world record is around the 14-pound mark. So they don't get enormous, but they are strong. So you've got to keep that pressure on them, keep them from getting into the rocks and getting into the weeds. So for that, I'm using more of a straight conventional star drag. This is a Truth SS. So for throwing surface iron, this is what I like to use. This has got a pretty high gear ratio, so I can wind it nice and slow and still get that good action. I'm not winding like crazy, but it's going to pick up really nicely. Again, on this one, 50-pound. Actually, on this one, I'm using hollow core braid. So this has got 60-pound Seaguar thread lock, so I can put a longer fluorocarbon leader, and I like to use fluorocarbon on iron. And then I can put a 40, 60, even 80-pound Seaguar fluorocarbon leader on that with a knotless connection. I don't have to worry about knots going through my guides. So that's kind of, some of the basic setups I use for calico bass fishing here along the California and Baja coast. Check it out. If you like the video, please give us a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe to Kayak Fishing Tales.